Well, I could get terribly hurt in a Burger King, and I could get a multi-million-dollar judgment against that Burger King, but I can't own the right to the Whopper. I can't own the right to put a Burger King sign out.
Statistically, I don't think it's unreasonable to say 1% of our population are not necessarily the most upstanding of people.
We just had a client that got in trouble, and the employee who got them in trouble, I won't say what he did, but they knew he drank a lot. They knew he partied a lot, and they knew that he was creative. And then he went and drank and partied and got creative, and somebody got hurt.
Maui Mastermind presents the Business Coach Podcast, answering your questions and providing real actionable insights for building a better, stronger, more profitable business without sacrificing your time, life, or freedom anymore.
Well, hello. Welcome to another episode of The Business Coach. I'm your host, David Finkel, and today I have a real treat in store for you. A good, dear friend of mine, Gassman, was kind enough to join me for 40 minutes conversation about how can you as a business owner protect your assets inside the business from the exposures and liabilities that you have. Alan is one of the nation's leading asset protection and estate planning attorneys. He's also someone who's been my attorney for myself, my spouse, Heather, and my companies for a number of years. He's been my legal quarterback for over a decade now and works with many people in the Maui Mastermind community. Further than that, he's one of the nation's top attorneys. He's one of the highest ratings, AV rated, peer reviewed at Martindale Hubbard for the legal ratings. He's actually part of the Hall of Fame for the Estate Planning Hall of Fame. Believe it or not, the Association of Estate Planners have that Hall of Fame. He's incredibly bright. He's been practicing law for over 35 years. And it's a real joy. So here's what we're going to get into today. He's going to share with you a simple shift for how to think about protecting yourself from liabilities. This is something that out of the conversation today I took, even though I've been working with Alan for over a decade. It just hit me in a different way. Most business owners think about how do I reduce things exposure by exposure by exposure by exposure? How do I reduce these individual exposures, and how do I insulate and reduce the risks of these exposures happening or protect myself from that? Alan's going to step back and he's going to give you a better framework of how to protect the golden goose that lays the golden egg inside your business, whether that be your IP, whether that be certain strategic locations that you have, whether that be a certain proprietary system that you have for how you market or sell or produce what you do. And it was really brilliant. It's based on all of his years of experience. Without further ado, please enjoy this week's special episode of The Business Coach. Well, Alan, welcome to The Business Coach. How are you today?
Good, David. Thanks for letting me be here.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, right now, I know you happen to be located in Florida, and I'm curious, are you still playing pickleball with your wife, Marcia? Is that still something fun that you're doing?
Marcia and I do play pickleball. I usually lose.
Now, she was interested in tennis once upon a time, so she has a little bit of an advantage if we're being fair, Alan, right?
Exactly.
Well, great. Today we're talking about strategies for business owners to reduce their risks in their companies. And I guess I'll start with this question, Alan. In your role, you played the role of legal counsel, and you've been zealously protecting your clients from all enemies, foreign and domestic, themselves and other outside external people. What are some of the liability or the legal risks you've seen clients get caught up in that if they had come to you prior or had listened to counsel, they could have avoided a lot of pain? So give us an example of the landscape of some of the risks that a person with a successful company faces.
Well, David, the first thing is there are significant risks of many kinds, and leaving the business entity open to loss of value or even loss of existence because of any one of 10 or 15 issues is just not excusable. So while we're going to talk later about, well, it could be a car accident, it could be an employee who got raped, it could be a product that killed somebody. No matter what it is the business situated such that it can survive the impact of a multi-million-dollar judgment or a governmental intrusion? So I think the first question is, what is the golden goose, and how do we protect the golden goose so that when the catastrophic event occurs, the golden goose can still be laying eggs and still be, to some extent, accessible.
This is interesting. When you're saying this, Al, what I'm taking from this here is before we worry about the specific niches of liability and exposures, you're saying step back and strategically think, have we insulated the goose, the golden goose, the entity, regardless of what the risk is? So give us a concrete example. What do you mean by that? Give us a practical example so it makes more sense to us as a business person.
Right. Well, as a lot of business people have a business name, a unique formula for doing things, a customer list, a lead, and a sales system, maybe a patent. Those things could be in a separate entity that would not be accessible to a creditor who gets hurt in a business situation. Those can be set aside, separate and apart. Or if it is inseparable, which is usually not the case, there could be debt put against it. So I have a $5 million business. If I have to sell it, the first $4.5 million is going to my family trust so that I have $4.5 million where I can rebuild and start again.
Interesting. So I never really thought about it this way. So for example, let's take a company, Acme, and we look at it and say, well, the most valuable thing that Acme Inc. has, they've got two things. They've got their trade name, which has a great brand associated with it. And they have a particular product that in their market space is really popular or good. You're saying that they could somehow have the IP of the trade name, the trademark or the trade name owned by another entity. They could have the actual product IP owned by another entity such that they're licensing it back to the active business. And if this main business gets attacked and some judgment is filed or something, the IP gets reversed back. Tell us a little bit, how does that protect them? This is really interesting.
Right. Well, I could get terribly hurt in a Burger King and I could get a multi-million-dollar judgment against that Burger King, but I can't own the right to the Whopper. I can't own the right to put a Burger King sign out. I can't own the right to have a building that looks like a Burger King. So what gets lost is a bunch of hamburger meat and grinder equipment and inventory and that type of thing. But the base business intellectual property itself and the ability to have an ongoing business, that goodwill stays protected.
So I'm hearing from you then that if I am getting this accurately, my first step as a business owner, someone watching this podcast, listening to it, my first step is to pause and say, what is the place that my business, what's the golden goose that makes my business work? The magic moat portion of it. Is it a brand? Is it a product? Is it a marketing system that just works? Is it a URL that I own that happens to get wonderful traffic? And then I talk with my business attorney, my asset protection attorney, whether it's you or if they're in a different state somewhere else, or I know you represent people in many different states, including, I need to disclose this, I mentioned this in the introduction, but for those of you who are listening, Alan has not only been a dear friend for roughly a decade now, but he's also my attorney for myself, my companies, and my wife. So I'll make sure I make that disclosure, Alan. I don't want anyone to say anything different than that. And I guess going back to it, I can go to you and I can say, Alan, these are the two elements that I see have the most value. And is that enough for me to go to you? And then you can say, well, let's now figure out how do we, like, you'll be the one to quarterback how to figure out how to protect that. Do I need to worry about how to do the protection as a business owner, or is that left to my attorney to do the actual plan and implementation of that?
Yeah, I think you talk to your attorney, you talk to your certified public accountant. You may have an IP lawyer who gets involved to help us design the best arrangement to provide this protection. And it may be one step closer to your own franchise arrangement or your own licensed business arrangement anyway.
Interesting. So I'm going to come back in a second to about the individual liability part, but I want to stay with this for a moment. So Alan, imagine, I'm not going to say it's me, so let's use it's Joe. Let's say Joe has done this work with you and he has a major exposure still. He ends up getting he's got a company that's worth $50 million. It generates $5 million a year of profit, of operating profit. It's valued on a 10x multiple. He's got a $50 million entity. without external debt. Let's just pretend that for the moment. And his golden gooses are his customer list. And his golden gooses is that he's got 3 flagship locations for his business that generate a lot of traffic for that. We'll pretend that. He now has a $25 million judgment against him. How does the work that you've done protect him? Like, how does it work in the real world now that this person's trying to collect on this judgment? What does it look like practically speaking, Alan?
Well, usually well before trial, we will sit down with the plaintiff lawyer and explain that their cause of action is against a company that's not essential to the ongoing business. And once they get their judgment, if they succeed, if they go all the way through the jury trial with all the expense, time, and risk, and they succeed, then they're getting a judgment against company number 4, which is simply the tenant in the Burger King building that pays Burger King a royalty. And the bankruptcy of that company will just result in an auction of the equipment. And then the landlord's going to go find another Burger King franchisee. So typically that's explained to the plaintiff lawyer to encourage the plaintiff lawyer to settle for limits of liability or reasonable amounts. The ultimate outcome could be a bankruptcy proceeding of the company that gets the judgment against it. And the bankruptcy court saying, well, here's the assets. Let's sell them and give these to the creditor. I don't see that you have a reach into the intellectual property. I don't see that you have a reach into the factory. The factory didn't hurt Mrs. Jones. It was the salesperson who hurt Mrs. Jones. That salesperson worked for a separate company. So going back to the 1600s, in the initial factory and industrial revolution of Great Britain, it was very clear that people who invest in a business, people who invest in a venture have limited liability and can limit the liability of the venture to the venture entity itself.
Interesting. So a couple of things I want to call attention to. You talked about that we don't wait until the actual trial and the judgment that's lost. You're saying we use this up front to try to bring this to a reasonable resolution. And you talked about limits of liability. I'm assuming there you meant the insurance policies that might be in place to expose, okay, or reasonable amounts. Question for you, I've never had that conversation with somebody. I'm curious, you must have had it many times. What's the typical response from the other side? Is it generally that they're trying to find a way that to show that protection is imperfect in some fashion and pierce it? Or is it one of resignation and now they're more reasonable? What typically happens when you have your conversation about, hey, your cause of action is against entity 4, and that entity is really non-essential. Let's look at the pragmatic reality. You might cause that entity to go bankrupt. Here's the assets or the financial position of that entity. What happens in that conversation?
Well, it depends on the personality of the plaintiff lawyer, and you get an assortment of different personalities, but usually it's friendly and professional. Because my part of the conversation is, hey, I know you're a hardworking plaintiff lawyer. I know your client was hurt. We're sorry to hear that. We're glad there's a couple of million of insurance. But I want to let you know, I did my job a couple of years ago, and there's really nothing here for her but that insurance. And we'll put up another 150,000, but you're just not going to be able to get the trademark, the product, or anything else, and you're going to end up in bankruptcy. And just wanted to let you know about it. Sometimes they'll beat their chest and get all upset and actually take it through the jury trial, maybe to get the publicity. But more often, they're very respectful and professional and say, thank you very much. I see the situation. I'm going to go back to my client and try to get her to accept that insurance policy.
That's fantastic. And when they look at it, what are the ways where an attorney that we as a consumer of an attorney's work product, right? How do we make sure that they don't screw up the protection so that we get hurt later? How do we make sure it was done the right way? What are the common things that some other attorney might do imperfectly that means that my protection is no longer really there?
How to find a competent attorney is the real question, right? And that can be a challenge because the industry standards for lawyers are not very strong. When they go to medical school and a residency, there's all sorts of things they learn. When you go to law school, you just take the classes, you pass the bar, no one showed you how to use it. Lawyers who practice in larger law firms will typically have higher quality and higher standards. And when there's three lawyers, a supervising lawyer and the middle lawyer and the junior lawyer, that usually gets done nicely, maybe more expensively. Lawyers who have an AV rating in the Martindale-Hubbell system. Martindale-Hubbell is a peer review organization where we rate each other confidentially, and somebody with a 5 an A rating in Martindale-Hubbell is usually pretty good. Best Lawyers in America is another fairly good source. Quite often, if I'm looking for a really good lawyer in a particular city, I will call a tax lawyer in that city because they're like one of me, and say, hey, I need a great defense lawyer. Who's good? Who cares? Who do you know? Who takes great care of your clients? And that's a 5-minute conversation. It's usually not the lawyer who advertises the loudest. It's usually not the lawyer with the slickest website. And it's usually not a lawyer who has 5 to 8 years experience and has only worked for herself.
It's interesting as you say that. I think back a couple of years ago when I came to you and said, hey, someone is infringing on our trademark. Who do you know who's really good on the IP side? Oh, this particular firm out of Iowa. I know it seems strange that they're in Iowa, but they're great. And the fact that they're in Iowa means that they're actually less expensive than if they were in New York City or San Francisco. And that relationship worked well. So your comment about referral, so I can go to my quarterback, with, in this case, Alan, that's you, to refer me out. I'm hearing these two other publication resources, the Martindale-Hubbell and the Best Lawyers in America. That's fantastic. I hadn't thought about that before. So when you talk about some of the legal risks now, you had mentioned at the beginning here, you mentioned about the employee that has some horrible sexual harassment situation that happens, or somebody who has a product liability issue, or a physical location where someone slips at the Burger King. So how do we now let's get into what are the more specific niche risks? How might I think about that for my business? What's the process that you as an attorney use to even think about what the risks would be for a business? And then we'll go into what do we do about what we've identified?
Well, I think the first way to look at it is who can physically get hurt. And the person who can physically get hurt the most, in my experience, is people who get struck by motor vehicles, whether that's a truck or a tiny car. People get hurt terribly by motor vehicles. And last year we had a client who had over 50 trucks on the road for over 50 years, never had an accident, and then had a horrendous accident, leaving a young person to never be able to use her arms or legs ever again. So these things happen, and it can happen on the way from the office to the bank to make a deposit. And it can happen when delivery people deliver things. And it happens all the time when people drink alcohol and drive for their employer. It happens every day in every city. You can't get enough coverage for it. It's horrific. That's definitely, that's exposures number 1, 2, 3, and 4.
I'm going to come back to how we protect ourselves from that. What are exposures 5?
People hurt each other, whether that's part of dating or pretending to date, or having physical affairs, or hitting each other, or slandering or libeling each other. People can just be very nasty, and they can be very physical.
Got it.
And you can bet that you'll be blamed if you have a employee or an agent who's doing that kind of thing that you haven't stopped when you knew that they sometimes got tipsy and flirted or things like that. So that's a second very big exposure.
Let's come back to that in a moment. I want to go back here. So you mentioned this client, it doesn't matter the name. The client has trucks on the road, truck struck, doing a delivery of some sort, struck this young woman. She's a quadriplegic. I mean, that's a horrible outcome. No one wants it, obviously. What are the steps early on that you would take to protect that business owner to act zealously in his best interest? What were the steps you would take for that?
Well, hopefully you took the steps before the accident.
Right. So what were the steps you hope to have taken before the accident? Give us some examples.
That the entity has if the company owns 50 trucks that are worth $10 million, I would hope there would be an $8.5 million note owed to a friendly bank or a friendly family entity. I would hope that the trucking company itself is in a separate entity that owns the name, the logo, the contracts for pickup and delivery and those types of things. And I would hope that they have that they have a reasonable number of millions of dollars of insurance.
So what I'm hearing from you is the trucking company that has done the business of getting the client, in essence, has subcontracted to this other entity who's doing the actual trucking work. Am I understanding you correctly, Alan?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And in doing so, does that, done properly with the right arm's length transaction documentation, does that contain the liability for a truck accident at the contracted company level, where it won't go up to the parent company who has a trade name, made the customer sale and contracted down to this other entity?
You can never be completely sure what a judge and a jury might do, but the case law in most of the states is very much in favor of the business person. If they made a reasonable effort to keep their activities and assets in separate entities and they respected the separateness. I don't think that Amazon employs a single driver. In every city that I'm aware of, the Amazon is like a franchise. It's a company set up and owned by a person approved by Amazon to pick up and deliver Amazon. The same applies for UPS. The same applies for DHL. These are separate entities. So if they can do that, then so can a small business.
Interesting. So they provided the opportunity for this other person to do this, just like you provide the opportunity for this other entity that happens to be owned by you. Go now talk for the insurance side. What are some of the common insurances for cars or for people being struck by truck, car, or other big forklifts, et cetera? What are some of the insurances that we should consider as a business owner to protect ourselves?
Well, the primary insurance is just the vehicle, the business vehicle being insured, and proper registration with the carrier of the drivers of the vehicle, and following the standards that you're telling the insurance carrier that you have, that there's a GPS control over the vehicle's being monitored, the vehicle's being repaired, the people driving the vehicle have been checked out by the insurance carrier. And then you may get $1 million, $2 million, $4 million of coverage. You could secondly require each driver to have their own coverage. So there would be basically dual coverage. And then let's make sure we don't forget that every business should have unowned vehicle coverage, which is where the policy says if somebody is driving their own vehicle for your business, even if you really didn't know about it or think about it, and they get in an accident and your business gets sued, that can be covered as well.
Interesting. And in general for that, are they also looking to have some kind of umbrella policy on top of that?
There may be the ability to get what you would call a business umbrella policy above that. So maybe you have a $4 million primary and then maybe a $10 million business umbrella policy.
Got it. And this makes sense now when you talked before that you're having the conversation with the plaintiff's attorney and you're explaining the situation. Hey, we want to do what we can, but let's look at the reality. What we think you should settle for is essentially the maximum coverage that the insurance would allow.
That's right.
Now let's go to the second case you get. Actually, pardon me. Case 1, 2, 3, and 4, if I remember correctly, were all the vehicle, Alan. So I'm talking case 5 now, where you talked about people doing really, unfortunately, hurtful things to each other. And you gave examples, and we'll choose 2 of them. We'll choose one example, which is the person who, some kind of sexual harassment and or inappropriate behavior that way. We don't like to think about it. As business owners, we would never behave that way. Yet if we've got 104 employees, odds are that someone in that 104 is not a good actor. I mean, statistically, I don't think it's unreasonable to say 1% of our population are not necessarily the most upstanding of people. Give us an example what that might look like in terms of like the exposure, and then you'll come back and say, here's some of the steps that we should know about as a business owner protecting ourselves in those situations.
Well, whenever you have an employee or even a contractor who's going to people's homes and interacting with those people, you just can't predict what might happen. So the entity that is employing and sending and overseeing that employee should not be the same entity that has the golden goose, if at all possible.
Got it. So one layer of this goes back to the original strategy of the golden goose is owned separately outside of the one that has all the employees and has the exposures because they have the employees, I'm hearing.
That's right.
Okay.
The second part of that is, and this is just something you should do anyway, is you should have a good employee practices process in your business. If you only have 3 or 4 employees, you ought to go to a 4-hour seminar or watch a video on how to reduce liability exposure with employees. Your insurance carrier will have that type of video for you. If you have 20 or 30 employees, you should go spend an afternoon with an employment lawyer and have that employment lawyer go through your materials, go through your protocols, and make sure that you're doing all the right things. We just had a client that got in trouble, and the employee who got them in trouble, I won't say what he did, but they knew he drank a lot. They knew he partied a lot, and they knew that he was creative. And then he went and drank and partied and got creative, and somebody got hurt. So now they're looking at potential punitive damages, not only the person who got hurt, but how did you allow this loose member of society to have access to her, where then he went and hurt her? Well, we never thought he really would, but we did know he drank a lot. Well, then you're talking about the existence of your business. So it's really important to be a good steward for society and make sure that your employees are well cared for and that you're watching your employees in a reasonable manner.
Got it. So I'm hearing that one simple step is, we need to do some basic level of education about this stuff, whether we have 4 employees or 40 employees or more. The more employees we have, obviously the greater the risk, the larger the scale. You went from taking a 4-hour seminar or watching a video that you even mentioned. We can probably go to our insurance carrier probably has those videos. It never occurred to me that I could go to my hub broker and say, hey, what do you have available for me or my key leaders or managers or supervisors to watch? It never occurred to me. You talked about going to an employment lawyer. Hey, here's how we go about hiring. Here's how our processes for managing. Here's our HR manual or practices that we have. Can you review these and give me your input on that? That's interesting. Go back to this person who was drinking and I, quote unquote, as a business owner knew about that, which exposes me to a whole nother layer of liability. What ideally would I have done when I knew about that? Because a lot of us as business owners, we put our head in the sand when we don't want to deal with something, right? We're used to being able to cherry pick what we like to deal with because we've reached a certain level of success in the business world. What would you have hoped that a business owner would do when they had learned about this person likes to party and be creative? We'll use your wording.
Fire fast. Just fire fast. Over and over again, the client calls me and says, 8 or 9 things happened with this employee I need to tell you. And the last thing that just happened caused a real problem. And they say, the first thing that happened was he came in late with alcohol on his breath. Well, you should have fired him right then. He was driving a car. The second thing was he also got disrespectful with the owners. So I could just fire, and fire. Everybody deserves a second chance, but not necessarily in your.
So you talk about fire. Why do you see? I mean, again, you have a very unique perspective. For 35 years, you've been representing thousands of business owners by this point, and you've watched them act in their best interest, and you've watched them act counter to their best interest. How's that for a polite way of putting stupid behavior? Why don't they do this earlier? What do you observe is going on for them that they allow this to go on?
The human mind does not perceive risk accurately. And there's a naivety because, I've had these 10 employees for 10 years now, and I've never had a problem, but their whole experience is 10 employees for 10 years, right? I've had the experience of thousands of employees for hundreds of years in my career, seeing all these issues. So it's just I think it's a naivety. I think also business owners are typically, and they think other people are hardworking and honest. And not everybody is hardworking and honest, so you take the risk. The third problem that we've faced more recently, David, as you and I both know, is just there's a tremendous lack of good people out there. So, but I think the same person that I'm talking about terminating because they're a danger, you've already told the client to terminate them because they're not doing a good job anyway, and they're bad for morale.
That's true. I can't tell you the number of people who we're coaching and we'll say, look, you got this person here, Ralph, and I know you like him. He's been with you for a long time, but he's a culture cancer. He's the person that undercuts you when you're not there. He's the one that does this. And so what I'm hearing from you is that in stereo, he's also the one that's probably the most giving you the most exposure and liability because of these behaviors are likely not isolated to just this, is what I'm hearing, Alan.
That's right. That's right.
What here's a I was thinking, I was so looking forward to this conversation, and I in advance had jotted down this question, Alan. I'm curious, and let me just tell you where it comes from. I'll talk to team members or I'll talk to coaching clients. And for example, there's a coaching client that we have that's built a really successful $75+ million company. He's done really well. He's got an attorney who's pointed out a particular exposure for him. It's a big exposure. It's a $10 million to shut down your business exposure. And this client of ours, I've had 4 conversations with him now, pointing that out to him, pointing that out to him, pointing that out to him. His attorney has had probably a dozen conversations pointing it out to him. I can see your smile because you're like, yep, I know where this one's going. And the guy doesn't want to hear it. And when I talk with him and I asked a question of, do you think this person who's your attorney, when you found them, do you think this person has expertise in this niche that you've hired him for? Yes. Do you feel like he's really a bright person? Yes. Does he have good experience? Yes. Well, this person you think is bright, has good experience, and is really knowledgeable in this niche, which you've just confessed to me, I didn't say it that way, is telling you that these are the exposures here. Yet you're not listening to him. And then the client proceeded to tell me why he thought legally he wasn't responsible in the ways that the attorney said. And so this is my question, Alan. What do you see as the 2 most common misconceptions about the law that you've watched business owners hold and believe are true, even when you've brought it up to them that it is actually not true? That's not how the law works. And these beliefs they hold about the law are simply inaccurate and, quite frankly, can be devastatingly consequential to them if they behave or continue to behave as if they're true. Give me what you think would be the big 2.
The first one is that dishonesty is okay, and breaking the law itself and engaging in criminal acts is okay, or even that it's cool. Because when law enforcement walks in and puts the handcuffs on, the game is over. I've had enough clients arrested in their own businesses thinking that, oh, well, it's just a little thing here. When the patient sees Dr. A's not on the health plan, so I'll just bill it under Dr. B. Well, that's against the law. That's a jailable felony. And the office manager may get angry at you someday and tell your spouse, who may divorce you someday, and rat on you. And then you're getting arrested in your lobby. Did you really need to do that? Did you really need to cut that corner? So that's the first one. And that also comes under the category of, oh, this is tax avoidance. I found he's not a CPA, but he used to work for the IRS. By the way, when you hear he's not a CPA, but he used to work for the IRS, just run as fast as you can, because there's a tremendous amount of dishonesty. So this person charges people $50,000 to help them cheat $300,000 on their taxes every year. He eventually gets sat down by the FBI and they say, you're going to go to jail, but a shorter sentence if you can get us 10 convictions. So that stuff happens. Breaking the law or being dishonest in a contractual arrangement. To me, that's the biggest naive mistake. And you could build a big profitable business on that. But at the end of the day, I've had clients go to jail, and it's not a pleasant situation when that happens.
Would there be a second one behind this? I get what you're saying here about, look, to think that I can get away with it because I'm cutting that corner because it really doesn't matter. That's just a formality. That's an artificial hoop that the government has set out for that. Or I'm trying to give the language that a business person might have to rationalize why they took the step to subvert that. The example of billing under another person's name, or the example of a tax avoidance situation or the example of whatever it might be, what's another misconception about the law that you've seen people have as business owners that get them in trouble because they act as if it's true, but it really isn't?
Treating employees as if they can be characterized as independent contractors can be a huge blow. I've seen businesses completely annihilated when the IRS comes in and says, you haven't paid employment taxes for the last 6 years. And all these people you've been paying as independent contractors haven't paid their income taxes. So we're going to come after you. Or the independent contractor gets hurt and sues my client and says, I should have been able to have workers' comp, but you didn't give me workers' comp. So now you have to support me for the rest of my life. So that's another big area of horrific risk that people say, well, I'll just get away with it. It saves me $2,600 a month. My accountant said it would be okay. Wink, wink. So that would be the second item that I commonly see.
That's interesting that I hear you say that part of it. So they have conceptions and believe that they can get away with, or it really doesn't apply to them, is what I'm hearing from you about that. I remember you were at a workshop we were jointly teaching at, and one of the things you talked about was, and I'm going to bring this up, which is I've watched business owners that I'm coaching say, I know this isn't a good person, but it's a great arrangement, deal, strategic partnership, or whatever you want to say. And I'm keeping my eyes open, and they'll accept that knowledge, thinking somehow that because they're smart, bright, vigilant, that what happened with the other people that did business with this person won't happen to them. I'm curious because you had talked about don't lie down with dogs with fleas or you will get fleas, right? Don't do business with snakes was a quote that I still remember you saying in a workshop. Talk a little bit about that, because I think there are times where I've watched clients get into heartache and trouble because they thought that it would be different with that person for them for whatever reason.
Right. This also goes to the perception that it may rain, but it'll never rain on me. When you get somebody who's too flashy, or they have a jet airplane for some reason, they're extremely well dressed, high stature, and they're from out of town. They're a friend of a friend, and they just always know how to make water turn into wine. They will lie, steal, cheat, and blame it on you. They will not go through with contracts that they sign, and they quite commonly have significant psychological issues. So you really do have to be very careful with those types of people. And it may be your best friend from high school who magically reappears on your doorstep. The number of Ponzi schemes that I see every 5 years are immense. Oh, I've got a great idea, David. If you could invest 100 and your friend invests 100 and their friend invests 100, thanks for the 300. Here's 50,000 of profits we already made. Can I get another 300? Here's another 50 of profits. Can I get another 300? Oh, I just disappeared. And then you're holding the bag because as part of that, you promised 450 people that you would provide them with water made into wine. And you're on the contract and he's nowhere to be found.
And I think one of the things I would put out there, just having seen enough clients deal with it, or even in my own business experiences over the past 30 years, in the context of, oh, I've got a good agreement in place. I mean, that's one thing a lot of business owners get stuck with. They don't even put an agreement in place. They have strategic relationships or even a formal partnership, but it's on a handshake, which I'm glad that they have a good enough trust with the other person. That's great. But to not formalize it, insane to me. But I think, Alan, one of the things I've learned from me is how difficult it actually is to enforce what's in a contract. So the contract, I can go through the legal means. And I've shared an experience that I had going through and suing a business partner who was eventually decided by the jury as someone who was fraudulent. And I did get a judgment off of that and all the rest of it, but it was a 3-year process that cost essentially $1 million in legal fees. It was something that, as a misconception about the law, I thought it was pretty obvious. I mean, that clearly these things are spelled out very clearly. How could it be this way? I think a lot of times business people don't realize how difficult it actually is in terms of time, money, and just emotional attention to and force a contract. And this goes back to your comment of let's work with people who truly are based on past behavior in extreme situations. I know for me, when I do due diligence, if I'm thinking, for example, of a project I might invest some money in, or a vendor that I'm thinking of choosing, or I really put a lot of weight on how did they behave in other past extreme situations, because I think the pressure of an extreme situation reveals more about that person's caricature. Did they take the easy way out, or did they do what was right, even when it was extraordinarily hard or counter to what could have been their best interest because they had a commitment to follow through? Does that spark anything for you or a comment back from?
Yeah. One of my best mentors always told me, he goes, it's very easy to be successful while you're successful. See how the person handles something when they're not successful, and then you'll determine what their true character is. And David, I know you and I have worked with dozens of people who were successful, then unsuccessful, kept to it, were honest, hardworking. They become successful again. Whereas others are a flash in the pan. They cut some corners, they're successful, and then they get beat up and they can never come back. It's just not. And then they lie, cheat, and steal on their way down. So you do have to remember, when people become unsuccessful, they become cornered animals, and you never want to corner an animal because they will attack you. So you do have to be very careful in that regard. The other thing I'll mention, the lower degree, is the person who is impolite to your staff, the person who is impolite to a waiter when you go to lunch. That person probably will not be a good result in the legal world for you, based on our experience.
Interesting. So how we're treating the people when we think no one's really noticing, or this person has nothing to give me, or I have nothing to gain from this relationship, how I treat that is revealing, I'm hearing from you.
Yeah, those people tend to be very short.
Ellen, I have one more question for you here today as we wrap up to this episode of the Business Coach Podcast. If you could give any one or two pieces of wise counsel to a business owner that would make a positive difference in their being able to sustainably stay successful, what would you tell them?
Well, the most important thing, David, would be to get a good coach and to have a good checklist, because we all have strengths and we always love to dwell in the area of our strengths. And we all have weaknesses, and we all avoid those weaknesses and don't even see them. So, for example, David, we didn't mention, but have you reviewed your supplier agreement? Have you reviewed your customer agreement? Have you determined what the risks are of your suppliers? What about your customers? Should you lock in your interest rate or float? Well, having a comprehensive checklist and being a responsible adult in your business is not always easy, but it is essential, because when the people come to us from financial annihilation for whatever reason, there's usually a few blind spots, and it was just caused by really not being thorough and not being professional in the approach of owning and operating your business.
I mean, what you're saying makes perfect sense. And I remember a conversation you and I had, probably was 7 years ago, Alan. I might be off by a year or two, but it was roughly about then. And we were talking about a mutual client, a client who was a coaching client of ours, and it was a client of your law firm. And the comment was, you had shared about the idea of even having, you talked about blind spots. It was about bring your insurance agent out to your work site, right? Have him or her walk through, and they're going to see it through the set of eyes that say, oh, that ladder doesn't have grippers on the floor and footings of that part. Or, you know what, you have ladders here, but they could get bumped by people going by on the aisle, or this. They're going to look at it with a different set of eyes. And your comment about blind spots, one of the reasons we need these different set of eyes is because we'll never see the full picture. We just can't. And so asking for that way. Any last advice you have about how do we make sure that I don't get tripped up by these blind spots? So I'm hearing one, which is using that great comprehensive checklist. I've added another, which is get multiple sets of eyes looking at things. Is there any last that you have here imparting that you would share with our listeners and viewers?
Well, it doesn't hurt to talk to an independent insurance agent or a defense lawyer who specializes in your area.
Interesting.
Just
Tell
buy
me
a
more
couple-
about that last one.
Yeah, hire a defense lawyer to come to your business and walk around, and she or he will tell you 96 ways you can get sued. So,
By the way, I love that, Alan. And if I'm in a small town or I'm in a town where there's a big law firm that I do not ever want to sue me,
right. That's
we
right.
could conflict them out, right? So our listeners, this is a good one. This is one I learned from you years ago, which was now I'm a client of theirs. And before they can represent somebody, they can't represent someone to sue me because there's a conflict of interest unless I'm going to waive that, which probably for the main plaintiff's attorney, I'm not going to do. That's interesting with that. I love that. Besides, they're going to tell you the 97 things. How do we make sure we're not immobilized by the 97 things, Alan? Because there's no way we can deal with all 97.
Well, the Parides principle, of course, says that the top 20% causes will result in 80% of the problem. So once you square away vehicles and the unruly employees and the relationships that shouldn't be there and the supplier and the customer big risks, you're probably in fairly good shape.
That's great. At least that's manageable. Might still be painful, especially the ones that deal with other people. Gosh, I'm going to have a conversation and a real adult conversation with them, or I'm going to have to replace. But the truth of the matter is, at least in my experiences coaching these clients, that it's anywhere from 72 hours to maybe a week of absolute agony. You have it, you're done. It's a week of a little bit of chaos to deal with the mess. And then it's incredible the freedom, the energy, the sense of relief they feel on the other side. And commonly, 9 times out of 10, they say, I can't believe I waited this long.
Well, that's another point. When you have that person come in to spot your risks and your blind spots, don't be surprised if they don't have some fantastic ideas to cut costs and increase revenues.
I love it. Alan, thank you for joining us on The Business Coach. It was really such a pleasure to get the benefit of your 35 years in the legal field. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, David. I continue to learn from you and love watching what your clients are able to achieve.
Thank you. Bye, everybody. Join us next week for another edition of The Business Coach.